Looking for all the latest tips, tricks, updates of what's going on in the recruiting industry, check out the Digital Recruiter Sunday night newsletter. I am not here to blow up your inbox. I don't have enough time to create an email every single day. I once a week send you impactful, a big thing that I've learned this week or realized from working with hundreds of recruiters, owning an agency myself. I'm in the trenches every day like you are, and I'm sharing everything that I'm seeing every Sunday, from content, from automation, from how to get better clients, how to find candidates quicker, how to grow your team, how to hire people, everything in between. The link is in the comments. Sign up today, or you can go to my LinkedIn profile, Clark Wilcox. It's the first link on my feature section. You can sign up there. It's all free. So you get all the tips, everything that you need, free in your inbox every Sunday night. Sign up today. All right, welcome back. We're going to have some fun today. We're going to talk change readiness. Not talking to a recruiting agency owner, not doing any of that. We're going to talk about how to change properly. How do you build the plane and fly it at the same time? How do you become a great leader? There's, Lord knows that people in recruiting, there's a lot to learn here from this lady. I'm super excited to have her on. I feel like we've become fast friends in the last month or so. I'm going to talk once a week, which is great. This might go 3 hours. No, I'm just kidding. We'll keep it to an hour. But Amy Yackowski, founder of Painted Porch Strategies, thanks for being here. Appreciate you.
Thank you, Clark, for having me. I am thrilled to be here. And yes, I am excited to dive into this, but I've loved our conversations we've had so far and can't wait to what we discover next.
It'll be good. I think we've had this recording going on 5 minutes already, so we just kind of get sidetracked. Most of that's my fault, but that's all right. It's something I'm passionate talking about. How do you, as a coach, digital recruiter program, and the group, and the one-on-ones, and the teams, I just dove headfirst into this 3 years ago of just, all right, I'm going to coach and teach automation and content, and then I learned I got to teach sales, I got to teach recruiting. And I talked to someone like you who's been doing 20 years and you make it look so easy. I'm like, oh, that's who I need to learn from. I got to talk to you and figure out what you've done, because the playbook has kind of already been written and you've dealt with so many of the problems that I've run into, which is, so I'm going to be fascinated on your take. And I know the listeners are too, because we all need to change and evolve and adapt, but doing it is a whole other battle. So I guess we'll start with how did you get involved in, I guess kind of what is Painted Porch and how did it start, and how did you get here?
Yeah, well, I got here because of a lot of my own failures, fumbles, and face palms over the last 20 years of being, I love alliterations. You'll probably hear a lot of them. But I got here just from this journey that I've been on for the past 20 years, starting in 2004 as a call center staffer for a healthcare staffing agency in New Orleans, Louisiana. I had no intention.
You have seen it all. Yeah.
A lot. You know what? It's interesting, Clark. A lot has changed, but yet a lot has stayed the same over the past 20 years. So my journey has had a lot of different twists and turns. I've worn many different hats as a staffer, a recruiter, working on the corporate side of staffing in system administration and training. And then I moved over to the technology side of things in implementation and product design. And basically, through all of this journey, I realized recently, I was doing a little bit of personal introspection recently, that I am just a naturally curious person. I think that why has been in my vocabulary probably as one of the first words I learned, along with no, if you asked my mother. No and why.
Same as my son.
Were my two, they were my two words. And since that time, I've just been curious to understand and dig into and help others shine light on, what's possible and what can make them be successful. And basically how we got to today, how we got to the Painted Porch, if you will, which is what we call our company, Painted Porch Strategies. How we got here is because As I was working alongside these clients, working for these different ATSs, trying to help them design their future, design what's possible for them next, right? No one picks a new technology because they necessarily want to stay exactly the same as they have been. They choose a new technology, they explore their operations because they want to find ways to optimize, to improve, to be better, to not just survive, but thrive in their industry and in their role and in the clients that they serve. And yet, even with that being the case, even having that deep desire to do something different, to try something different, to be something different, I regularly would find that we would often be trying to just reinvent what is. And we would spend months, sometimes years, in these discovery phases of a project trying to design the future. And when we got to that finish line, it would look, feel, and to a certain extent act very similar to what they were already doing today. And as someone who was designing these products and working really deeply alongside these individuals, I just kept asking myself, okay, why is this happening? Why do we keep missing the mark? Why is it that there's these really smart people who are the SME of SMEs, who know their business inside and out, who understand that change needs to happen in order for them to be able to not just sustain, but to grow in their organization? And yet we keep bumping into these same barriers. There's got to be something here. And I always like to joke. I channeled my inner Taylor Swift, and I first asked, "Am I the problem? Is it me?" Because I was a through line through all of this.
Yeah.
I'm going to be completely transparent. I was like, well, okay, I was involved in all of these, and these all didn't quite go as planned. They either took too long, they took way more money than we planned, or we got to the end and everybody was like, well, this kind of sucks. I mean, it's not really giving us the gains that we had hoped for. In fact, it feels like it's slowing us down. And so through that, I said, you know what? I think there's this missing piece. There's this idea that we kick everything off and we're moving full steam ahead, phase one, moving forward, designing, planning, plotting, testing, configuring, training, all of those things. And yet it's missing the mark. And I said, I think there's a piece missing. And it's what I like to call phase zero. It's this idea of readying the organization, readying leaders, readying teams to step into this idea of what's possible as opposed to what's familiar and what's known. And that's really the impetus of Painted Porch Strategies. Very long explanation, but that's my journey in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, it's a great starting point. So what is phase zero?
So for me, phase zero is all about this idea of being ready to launch. And I don't mean launch like launch a go live. I mean launch a project. We were talking in an earlier call about the idea of sports, right? I am a moderate sports fan, but I know of it. I'm familiar enough with it. I grew up in New England. My husband's from Massachusetts. I know about sports to a certain extent. Also, you and I do have a little bit of a Gator connection.
Yeah, well, you know what? I grew up in Massachusetts too. So, yeah, I grew up in the North Shore. Yeah, how did we not figure that out already? Yeah.
Oh my gosh. All right. Okay. So there's so many parallels, Sir Clark. But so when we think about sports, if you think about it, you don't show up on game day, and that's the first time you're working with the team. That's the first time you're, I'll say, running plays if you even have plays. No, there's
putting the pucks in the hoop. Yeah, all that stuff.
Exactly. 3-point touchdowns. No.
Yeah, exactly.
But when we think about this idea of sports, there's this preparation that happens. There's this work that happens before you play the game. The way I look at projects is that's you playing the game. That's not the Super Bowl. That's just trying to get the wins in order to eventually get to the Super Bowl. But to play the game, you have to do conditioning. You have to learn how to work with other people. You have to design and study and practice plays. So that way, when you do go out on the field, you can actually execute effectively during the game. And hopefully through all of that, score a couple points and maybe have a W on your side of the scoreboard at the end of it. So that's really what this phase 0 is. It focuses a lot on preparing individuals, leaders, and teams for change. And we look at it through the lens of a couple different pieces, helping them develop a future-focused mindset, having the courage and the curiosity to challenge what is and to have healthy conflict to debate and decide what could be. When we think about, especially with digital transformations, which is a lot of what I have been involved in and was involved in my prior life as well, we're designing the future of the entire operations of an organization. We're not just implementing, for example, a LinkedIn strategy, right? And I say just, but that's actually a pretty big thing in and of itself. But we're not just adding on a small piece. We're often implementing an entirely new ATS, even to an extent, an entirely new tech stack. And we're bringing the entire organization, hopefully, together to design this and to paint the picture of what's possible. While these individuals may know of each other, there's a VP or a director of recruiting, there's a director of sales, there's credentialing, there's middle office, there's HR, there's all these other pieces. They know of each other, but have they ever actually had to work with one another side by side to design something new that is beyond their scope, their lane, their understanding, their portion of what they do within the business? These people need to know how to work together. They need to be comfortable with one another. So that way, when someone like me comes sometimes like bull in a china shop or, bear swatting at you in the forest, when I come in and I start asking why, or others start asking why across the table from one another, they're comfortable and able to have these conversations and able to move these decisions forward instead of just reinventing what's familiar, what's known, what's comfortable.
So I love the sports analogy, and I interrupt you. You said go Gator, and yes, definitely go Florida Gators. And what I'll add is, it was amazing to me. I told you this the other day how many the audience sees the games, the crowd sees the games, but I got there in March, and I saw like the pro combine like that we held on campus, the spring practice, then the spring game, then everything that happens in the summer and all that. And then you have two-a-days and training camp. And then you have the first game that's typically against like a cupcake that you're supposed to win 62-0, right? And all that. But like the amount of hours and work and the practices that I filmed and the tape that I cut up for, players and coaches and all that, like it is astonishing just to get to that first play of the season, how much work gets into it. That's why I love the analogy. And so many people are focused on the game, and maybe it's a cultural thing, maybe it's just how we're wired. And it's one of the things that I have been slow to, I wouldn't say I was quick to realize it, but learning holistically how what we do on LinkedIn and automation and content does the domino effect of the rest of the organization. I think it's completely to your credit, something that has been definitely a roadblock for me of like, okay, how I have to learn how I fit into this, how this fits and why it's so important, which I kind of know. But then I have had to learn agencies and how they operate and leaders, and which is why I've been so excited to talk to someone like you, because you 100% get the battle that I've been fighting. Because I'm like, it's LinkedIn. How obvious does this get? Like, we need to fix your LinkedIn. You're a recruiting agency. You spend 6 figures on LinkedIn tools. Why are we not getting the most out of it? Yet I still meet friction. Phase 0, phase -1, phase 1, whatever you want to call it on my end. I to me, it's like phase obvious, right? I think that's what it is for you as well. It's so I get that. So I just wanted to say that because I resonate and get what you're saying about you got to practice to then play the game, to then win the game, and then make the plays at the Super Bowl. I think that the Patriots one of the Malcolm Butler, the 10-year anniversary of that Super Bowl against the Seahawks, right? Of like they practiced that play in training camp and he kept getting it wrong, and then when it came time in the game, the biggest play of the season, he got it right. Right, that things just matched up, and that was 7 months. Like, and they have footage of the exact play in training camp. of them practicing it. Like they knew it was coming. It was because, the clock was running. It was second down. It was the formation. They almost kind of had to throw the ball because of the timeout situation and let the clock run. Like it was all brilliant. Like there was purpose in
Mm-hmm.
getting there and making that winning play. So I guess what I'm trying to get at in all this is like, is there an example of like a project, right? That's like, can you give us like almost like the training camp where it's at, and then kind of like how it looks at like the Super Bowl at? Because that's what I'm curious about,
Yeah.
like hearing
Yeah.
it in like layman's terms from you, like what that looks like. That's a big
I'll,
ask,
I'll
but I think you
it's
can
it's a
handle
big
it.
ask. I'll
Yeah,
try my best, and if
yeah,
not, we'll cut this up and we'll do it a second time so I get it
yeah.
right.
We'll
But
film it
yeah,
again. No,
we'll fix it in post.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
yeah. But no, I mean, you make a really great point, and that's really ultimately what it is. It's learning the players, learning the plays, practicing how to run the plays. So that way, when you're in the game, when you're trying to execute on this effort, you have done the work. Tony Robbins always likes to say we get rewarded in public for what we do in private. And it's
Mm-hmm.
the same premise here. And the comparative I would give is an organization that is not change ready is, I think meetings are probably the biggest example of this. So I will
Yep.
give you an extreme. I was involved in one project, one implementation project of an ATS. It was when I was at eRecruit that lasted 7 years. Now, granted, I was not involved in the project for 7 years. I came in towards the tail end, towards like the last
Yeah.
maybe year and a half or two. But it took 7 years to be able to get to even at final decisions to then get to the Super Bowl or to the finish line that you're trying to get to. And a lot of it was because they had not done the practice of how to effectively execute and make decisions during meetings. I have been in so many projects where it takes weeks, if not months, to make a decision of how things are going to be done in the future. Whereas an organization that does the work of change readiness, they practice how to effectively execute meetings. They have structure that has been put in place. They know their role, right? They do their job, to quote Mr. Bill Belichick. They
Yeah.
know their role. They know what they are there to do. They know how to effectively execute. And they also have a very clear understanding of where the play starts and when the play is finished. And that is the key, I think, when it comes to decision making in any given project. Some of the biggest hurdles that I've seen that have caused projects to go over time, over budget, have kind of musical chair resources, or by the time we get to the finish line, everybody is just like, "Are we done? I don't even want to look at this thing anymore." Like, I fine, whatever you want, I'll do, because I just don't care. I'm apathetic at this moment to what we get and when. I just need something.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the key differences is understanding how to execute meetings well, but coming in with a very clear play that you're trying to run, that play being a strategic roadmap, a strategic vision, and I'm not saying a project plan. I'm not saying a racy. I'm not saying even to a certain extent, like a training schedule or anything like that. I'm talking about a strategic map of what it is you're trying to do, why, where, who, how, having all of that clearly defined, and then knowing your role and practicing that role. So that way, when it gets to that phase one, when you kick this project off, when that software vendor is starting to charge you for licenses that you are not using because you signed a contract, and when that implementation partner comes in and says, "All right, what are we doing?" You're ready. You're ready to make those decisions. You're ready to get into those meetings and execute effectively because you have clarity on where you're going, you know what plays you're going to run, and you have practiced with your fellow teammates how to run it effectively.
I love it. You're reminding me. It's one of the things I've actually been proud of myself this year. At least starting around March or April, as I realized I was trying to take on too many projects with me and myself and Christina, who works on the team, an integral part of the team, who we're day to day together, and it was like too much. And I realized like I'm not ready for most of the projects that I've
Mm-hmm.
took on, and it's a really like, and it was so like relieving to just not take the projects on that I'm like, okay, I actually need to work on some of the stuff myself or some of the structural stuff or the foundational stuff first before I can do some of these cool looking projects
Yep.
that I want to do or bring these people on, because I'm bringing on vendors at times where I couldn't get the most out of them, and it was driving me nuts. Probably drives them nuts too. You know, we've talked about this, like being in a position to be a great client or great vendor, or you work with teams internally like that. Yeah, that is a real thing. And I guess where's the disconnect? Why isn't this a thing? Why do people know not to do this? Like, what have you seen as where is the disconnect with all this?
So this is purely my opinion. I should say, like, the opinions expressed by Amy Yackowski do not reflect Clark or Digital Recruiter. But this is solely
I'll
my
probably be
opinion. But
worse. You're good. Yeah.
put a disclaimer at the bottom.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say that, and this is from my lens. This is from my experience. But my experience is informed over 20 years of doing this in very small organizations to very large enterprise staffing companies. And I think surprisingly, the disconnect is consistent across all of them. And it's a couple different things. Number one, I fully recognize that you are in a state of needing to change because there is some force pressing against you, causing you to move forward. Again, I'm going to sound like a Tony Robbins guru, but he says it's either like a toward goal or an away goal. Like, what is the driver behind it? Are you trying to move towards something greater, or are you trying to get away from something that maybe is a problem? And for a lot of staffing firms, just by virtue and nature of the business that you're in, often it's reactive. So we recognize that we are behind our competition. The market is shifting. Revenues and profit margins are down. We are taking too long to get our openings filled. We have a high fall off rate. Like, all those things are reactions. They're reactions to situations that are happening. And so because of that, to be able to say, we need to make a change, but we need it to happen as soon as possible, that's sometimes where it gets tripped up. Whereas I come in and I'm like, I think all of that is great. I that change you want to make is valuable. It's important. It's necessary for your organization. But before you go, before you shoot the gun and start running across the start line.
Brief technical difficulties, but we are back. We're diving into the audit process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what
So
that's
so
like.
how we how we determine, and then what we actually address when it comes to this idea of change readiness, is kind of across 6 spectrums. The first one is individual mindset. How do your leaders, your teams, your employees, how do they feel when they show up to work? How do they feel about the work that they do? Understanding that work is work and we all got to do it, unless we win the lottery and then we blow our own money and then we have to go back to work. But understanding that work is work, but how are they showing up? Do they feel energized? Do they feel connected to what their role is and how it contributes to the vision, mission, and purpose of the organization? Because mindset is the foundational piece that is going to determine whether or not people are interested
Yeah.
and then willing to actually lean in and adopt any type of change within your organization. And this is not resistance. This is, no thanks. I ain't got time for this. It's already too much on my plate. How are they feeling? How are they showing up? Can they remain resilient? Can they navigate stress and uncertainty? Then we look at the team. How does the team work together? Are they a team in name only? How are they collaborating with one another for greater shared success beyond their own? Because if they're all in for themselves, you're going to have a real hard time trying to get people in a room together to decide and agree and move something new forward. Then we talk about how do they communicate with one another? Are they comfortable asking and receiving feedback? Are they willing to challenge one another in a healthy way? Or is there a lot of dysfunction amongst the team? Is trust low within the team? Are they not willing to raise their hand and ask for help or seek assistance or offer assistance? Then we look at like operationally the systems, right? Like how are the systems working? And the systems are both the technology, but also how things are done within the organization. How people work across different departments. What are the systems and essentially like the cultural components that are in play? How is the organization aligned with its mission and values? Do people know what those are? Do they believe it? Is there trust in the organization? Those are the type of elements that we look for. Their mindset, the way they collaborate, the way they communicate, how are they effectively leading and supporting one another? Because all of those foundational pieces are the core signals of whether or not your change effort is going to be a very bumpy road or if it's going to be a smooth journey or smoother journey that you're going to be going on. So a lot of what we do is focus on some of those kind of foundational, people stuff. How do you work with other human beings? How do you work and how do you design something new? How do you collaborate for shared success? How are you comfortable challenging sacred cows and stated norms within your organization? Because while what you've done up until now might have gotten you to a certain point, right? Not to use the old adage, but what got you here won't get you there. But also, if you're trying to go somewhere else, if you're trying to level up, if you're trying to not just survive, but thrive, if you're trying to set your organization and through that, your operations and your technology up to be able to scale and to grow and to thrive, you have to have some of these foundational pieces in place. Else it's going to be what I like to say, essentially like change theater. You're going to get there. Change is going to happen regardless of how much effort you put in or not. It's just what is the end outcome going to be? Like I said, it's, leaning into sports. I blend a lot of analogies, unfortunately, but it's like running a marathon. Going through some sort of organizational redesign or optimization or digital transformation is a marathon. And you would never, if I said, Clark, you want to go run a marathon tomorrow? Come on, join me at the start line. We're gonna do this together. Make sure we got our name tags. We're ready to go. Okay, now we're just gonna go.
Yeah.
You would be like, heck no, that is the worst idea, because I know that either 3/4 of the way through, my knees are going to give out. I'm going to pass out. I'm not going to have the right food or nutrition or goo or whatever it is. Or I'm going to get to the finish line and I'm going to have to lay in bed for 5 days because I won't be able to move. It's like, that's the way I like to think about this idea of readiness. It's training. It's putting in the training, putting in the practice, putting in the prep before you start to execute on the initiative.
Yeah, you might as well just order a coffin if you're going to make me run a marathon tomorrow, but that's fine. But let's go back to step one, which is the leadership mindset. What do you do if they don't have a good mindset? Can you work with someone like that?
We can, but if they are the primary, then it's problematic. Then to a certain extent, I say, I will pray for you and we'll hope for the best. But really, any successful change has to start with the leadership, but more specifically, the executive leaders. We can lean on some methodologies that are better than others when it comes to change. Pro-Sci, take it or leave it. I'm Pro-Sci certified. There's a lot of good components to it. I wouldn't follow their methodology 100%. But one of the things that they talk about and they say is like priority one is active, visible, engaged executive sponsorship. If you have your president or your CIO or your COO, whomever that is, if they are not interested in making this change successful, most likely it's going to struggle. Now, there's still a lot that can be done from the ground up, and there's a lot of things that we can do outside of that individual to try to make this a movement as opposed to a moment. But it's going to be there's going to be more hurdles if you don't have that. But I mean, I think I told you earlier, I mean, I do coin myself as a huggable bear. So I'll come in with kindness, but I will definitely challenge those barriers. And one of the core things, often the reason why people are hesitant, or they resist, or they push back, or they don't want, they're risk averse, whatever the reason is because there is an underlying truth behind it. It's just getting to that truth, uncovering that truth. Things like, oh, well, we don't have the time, we don't have the resources, we don't have the money. Those are surface level complaints to a deeper fear that is happening within the organization. And if we can take the time and we can ask some of those maybe uncomfortable or hard questions to really uncover what that deeper truth is, then usually through that you can address those barriers, address that resistance, so that way you can have better footing moving forward with your change.
It's so true. I mean, it's illuminating so many things that even I've experienced, and I've made the rule after Q1 this year. I was like, I will never do another group training for an agency without a leader in there. Not the
Mm-hmm.
owner, president, whoever. It can't just be producers, because what do? They just go back to the leader. Well, what are they doing? Or do they want me to do it? Or they're not on this call, or they're not part of this, so it must not be that important, or I might not need to do it. And it's just a waste of my time all the time, because if you can't see how transformational this is, a lot of times it isn't necessarily their job to see, right? It's by
Right.
definition leadership's job to see it. But to your point, they have to show up. And I think in my naiveness, or maybe my passion or the transformation, also because I just went and did it and it worked so well for me. That's like, why wouldn't this be, why wouldn't everyone jump at this? Doesn't everyone want their
Yeah.
life to be easier? And but to your point, it's just not as simple as that, right? There's so many different
Yeah.
factors, and people, they want to run away from the pain. But it sometimes, even something like LinkedIn for a recruiter is almost a nice to have
Yeah.
a lot of the time. That's what I realized, which is crazy to me, but it's true. It's almost like a nice to have to do, where I can just like, whoa, I got to do my 20 screens, and we have our database, and I can sling shit against the wall, and like I've like hit my numbers, so like I'm good, and
Mm-hmm.
like I got to deal with everything else in my life. And so it's just been really interesting to experience that. And yeah, it really has to come top down, and leadership has to be in the right mindset. And now I've never had an issue saying no to prospects that aren't fit, or leaders that look at me like, well, what can you do for us? I'm like, what can you do for yourself?
What can you do for you?
uh
Yeah.
yeah, how
Yeah.
about that? Like, I don't know. The answer is, the answer is literally, I don't know.
Yeah.
And so, what do you recommend? Because someone listening that's like, maybe they've had a tough couple years on the market. To your point, there are less margins. It's been tougher to get to where they were a couple years ago, even though that was a crazy period. And like, we got to rip the band-aid and let go of that. We got to go through the 5 stages of grief and let that go. But they're maybe in a tough mindset, and like they like what you're saying, but it's just like, how do I know like when I'm ready, or how do I get ready even if I'm in a little bit of a rut or
Mm-hmm.
whatever else? Like, what do you do then?
Well, just like a good 12-step program, mine's only 10, but just like a good 12-step
Yeah,
program, awareness is the first step.
yeah.
And if you feel like you're in a rut and you're like, I know something needs to happen, but either I don't know where to start, or I don't know what the um what the environment is to try to make this happen, like what are we working with here, that's where we can just start by having a conversation. The audit is a really helpful tool, and we have a free one on our website too. It's like a little tiny mini version, but it's a very simple tool just to be like, okay, where might there be the biggest hurdles, the biggest barriers to wanting to change? Because you touched on it a little bit ago, change itself is happening every moment of the day, truly. And as human beings, there's this interesting dichotomy when it comes to us with change. We're really good with unplanned change that just kind of happens on the whim. You're taking your child to the doctor and there's an accident and you have to take an alternate route. Your spouse calls and says, we're out of milk. Okay, I'm going to go really quick, alternate, I'm going to go grab some milk. Things like that. We're really good with on the fly, unplanned. But when it comes to intentional change, we can be our own biggest barriers to that. And it's because of who we are. It's because of our makeup. We are human beings. Change is an event, but really where change is realized is in our ability to adapt, to transition. And that requires us to leave something that's known, that's well worn, that's understood, that's comfortable behind in pursuit of something that's less certain, that's less tested, that's less predictable. And because of that, just our biological brains, our primitive brains that we still are working with, even though we're moving at such a fast rate, evolutionary, like technologically and everything, our primitive brains don't like risk. They like to keep us safe. They want to protect us from that thing that might do us harm, that might create fear or uncertainty. And it's only once we can uncover and understand what that deeper protection is that we have that we can effectively move change forward. I am the first one to admit that I have set a lot of goals in my life, right? I mean, I think we would all like six-pack abs. I have set a lot of goals in my life, personally, professionally, physically, and I have spectacularly failed on them time and time again. Even though in my heart of hearts, in my core, I truly connected and believed that it was something necessary and important. It's because adaptation is not just a habit. It's not just repeatedly doing something until it kicks in or doing like a New Year's Eve resolution style approach. It actually requires us to grieve to a certain extent, to grieve what is known and what is, and be willing to take a leap and try something different, knowing that we might not know how it's going to land in the end.
There's definitely a fear. I'm glad I didn't say this earlier because it's more of a fleshed out thought, but there's a fear of failure, and there's not really the opportunity to learn from failure in our culture. I mean, especially now in the last 10 years, where with the change of the phones and everything else, and now everyone has hyper ADHD and everything else, or you can't look bad if something was recorded. I mean, Lord knows if I was in high school or college right now at this age with the phones and everything else, I'd be in prison. And just from what, like drinking or something, or what, like just like it's so everything's so out there, and there's such like social shame associated with it. But then people forget about you in 10 seconds just as quickly as they
Yeah.
popped up on their phone. Right. It's interesting because I actually recorded some stuff for our updated content course today about this. Of just like, you just have to get over it. Like, life is too short to truly care. And we are not in high school. We are not in middle school. And if you're in high school, middle school, listening to this, please turn this off and go do something, because you should not be listening to a recruiting podcast at that age. Like,
Unless you're trying to recruit your friends to help you build something. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Go do something else. Get yourself in trouble. I'm just kidding. But like, that's ultimately what comes out. So there's no environment to fail. And I think if you see people get canceled or say the wrong thing, or they don't have the right signature or anything like that right now, like there is really risk sometimes with doing the things or
There's
saying the
perceived
things.
there can be real risk.
It can be
Absolutely.
real.
Some of those ones that you mentioned, there can be real, but in the context of the stuff that we're talking about, right? In
Yeah.
the context of adopting a new LinkedIn policy, shifting maybe to a new ATS, or restructuring your operations and the role that you have. In our minds, there's huge risk, and getting it wrong can have huge implications. And yet, the only way that we are able to effectively make this change is to try
Yeah.
again. We're seeking perfection in in a in a world and in an environment, and to a certain extent in an activity that is very complex, that cannot be predicted, that cannot be controlled. And so we have to be willing to take these small risks. But you're exactly right. You have to build up a little bit of that failure knacker to a
Yeah.
certain extent, and also recognize that create an environment where it's safe to do that, where we're not going to unnecessarily judge one another, where we're going to be willing to try something and make it small experiments, right? It's like a very agile mindset. I always joke, I was in product design. You have a phone, we have a computer, this Riverside that we're using, this microphone. If they got it right the first time, then we'd all be out of a job, right? We would all have an iPhone 1. We would
Right.
all have a Lisa, I think, was like the original Apple laptop, I believe, or something along those lines. Don't ask me. But we don't get it right the first time. We continually try, inspect, adapt. I mean, even to
Yeah.
get to the moon, they practiced a lot. They didn't get it right the first time, and they're
Right.
continuing to try to get. So we have to create that environment where failure is okay, but we create a space where experimentation is how we're going to learn and grow and adapt, because especially when we're talking about these type of changes which involve people, and we are hella complex, there no two people are the same. When we're talking about people, we cannot predict their behavior. We can't predict how they're going to receive this. We can't predict how they're going to navigate and adapt to this change. But what we can do is we can create the right environment to allow them to navigate through it and feel confident and courageous and successful on the other side.
And I think the thinking big, and it's so interesting that when leaders like can't think big or can't think of the opportunity of initiative to get it right, what could happen. Uh, I guess kind of I'm thinking the other barrier is like just even that communication. And you talk about creating an environment where that communication can happen. I mean, what if you get into a project, someone's not carrying their weight, or you're not sure about the potential of the team to see
Mm-hmm.
through the project, or you were like someone says something and like try to do this and work with someone, and they go to HR or something like that. I mean, I don't know,
Yeah.
like like I gotta imagine as the leader, those are things that are coming through that could be part of the risk, as not necessarily that they don't want the new ATS or the digital transformation or LinkedIn or whatever, but like they're almost worried about their own team. All right, well, we are back after a brief interruption. Just kidding. Maybe a couple weeks interruption. So we had some technology issues on our recording, and so now we're back. If you're wondering why I have a different shirt and there's a different background for Amy, we had to reschedule some time because the internet went out on one of us, and we're not naming names here. And so now we're back because we couldn't just end like The Sopranos and just cut to black. We actually had to give a proper conclusion to our fantastic conversation. So, welcome back, Amy.
Thank you, Clark. Thank you for your patience and understanding with um, a very big cell phone company completely taking down the tower that was connected to the Wi-Fi where I was staying. So thanks for rolling with it.
It was pretty funny because I was looking back at the video recording of me. It's just sitting there, like just looking, like what happened? And then I think the text like we're going through for you because like everything like in your area like shut
Yeah,
down. It was crazy.
everything shut down.
And I was
Yep.
like, well, I hope she's all right. It's like, is there a tornado or like what happened? So I hope everything's good. But you were good. And now we're back here. And yeah, wrapping up the conversation, we were talking about, team building and not having, you can't have 12 point guards on one team and expect to win a championship, right? There's different roles, there's different personalities, and getting all the different types change ready and kind of understanding your team. And I guess we can kind of just sum up our whole initial conversation with like,
Put a bow on it.
yeah, putting a bow at, and maybe reiterating some of the stuff we talked about before, but like, if I'm a company and I'm looking at, all right, I'm change ready, or I think I'm change ready, this stuff sounds kind of nice, right? Oh, I have my team's going to
Mhm.
be better at relationships and better that, but maybe it's harder to quantify than like I'm going to have a data or automation running, and it's going to have my connection requests and reply rates are right there. Like, what's like the data you're tracking? How do you look at ROI? Like, how do you quantify this to make it like this isn't a nice to have? This is a must have because I know it's a must have. You know it's a must have. The leaders you've worked with know the changes, but like, how do you do that when you're evaluating so many different options of like getting your team better?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple different things. One of the things that we really like to focus on because change is not, like we talked about before, change is not an event, but change is also not something that happens just by them attending a training or even showing up to coaching calls that we offer and support calls that we offer. That is not where change happens. Change happens in the individual's ability to adapt and make these adjustments in what they're doing, how they're doing it, how they're showing up to do it. And so the way that we like to look at it is the arc and shift in behavioral change. In fact, interestingly enough, uh, as an aside, 80% of the success of change happens after the go live. That's really where you are going to see the fruits of your labor. But we really like to look at it from that behavioral change. Where did they start before they had our training? And we have tools that can help measure that. So, where did they start before? And then, how are they progressing after they've received this training, this support? And historically, you will see at least a 10x difference in the change that's happening in where they were to where they are now. I think as learning and development people, we love our trainings. We will die on those hills
Yeah.
of the trainings that we offer. But the truth is that the training is not where the change happens. It plants the seed, and the change really happens over time. But to that end, I will say one other point. All of those different tools that you want to start adopting, bringing in AI, creating more automation, optimizing your sales process, optimizing your recruitment outreach and intake and conversion. All of those may have tools that are going to help support it, but those tools need to be executed, for the most part, by people. Those
Mhm.
people need to make the decisions of what the automation should do, what the triggers and the output should be, and you want to ensure that whatever they're doing is not creating a doom loop of automation. Those practices, those methodologies that you are trying to implement hinge on an individual's ability to effectively understand, get alignment, create context, adopt, and actually adapt to whatever it is you're introducing. So oftentimes, whether it's a small investment or, the clients that I'm typically working with are doing big transformations. These are half a million, a million, 2 million, $3 million investments in these technology changes. That $3 million is going to be for naught. It's going to go to waste if you cannot get your people to successfully lean in, adopt, and make better decisions about how you're going to use that technology in the future.
I think it's so well put. And I had a conversation the other day because you see advice on LinkedIn or Twitter to business owners or leaders. You just got to delegate. Well, okay, so you try to delegate and it doesn't work out. It's like why, right? What am I messing up? Is a person messing up? And I think that's to me so symbolic of what you're talking about because yeah, delegation is a lot of times the answer, but then how you do that, how you do it effectively, is a whole other ball
Yeah.
game, and that's a learned process, and you're typically not going to get it right the first time or two, and all that. But when you get it right, that opens up so much, and I know that's part of the change readiness is like who's doing what and when and kind of how to even approach that and it is like that's the nuance right there. Like, what could happen if you could fix that? Well, you could get way more done and not have everything on your shoulders. And at the time, I think I'm speaking to
Hmm.
myself when I say those things, but that's the stuff that I'm going through, and it is. It's like I've bought tools, I've invested in programs or consultants, and we weren't ready to change or adapt that change. So we didn't get our money's worth. I don't blame that other person or the tool. Like that was on us. That was on me. So I think this
Hmm.
happens. This happens everywhere, and
Yeah.
I don't say this. The fix is simple, but you have the solution. You got to get in and do the work. But like that's the stuff, and I think because sometimes it isn't like a shiny tool or anything like that, it's hard to kind of grasp. But we've all seen it break. We've all
Hmm.
seen people not be ready for a change, and what that does. I had it in sales at Aerotech, and I didn't understand like a lot of that piece, like with the sales part and managing my recruiters. I've now as a business owner with incorporating technologies and different consultants, like it's everywhere. And so, yeah, it's I think we can always see it. It's just like kind of taking a step back and be like, oh, that's what actually needs to be fixed
Right.
versus everything else. And it's all like there. I'm sure like every company in some way, shape, or form can utilize like can work with you and
Hmm.
see
In
benefit. It's
small,
just like you
even in
kind of have to
small
recognize it.
ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, even in small ways. Now, I do have my 12-month program that is really meant to help you both prepare and then support you along your change journey. But there are small things. There's hour workshops, half-day workshops. There's even just on-demand training. If your budget or your time is limited and you're like, we're just going to try this on our own. Great. Well, call us if you have questions, or we'll pop in every once in a while to do some
Yeah.
support and reinforcement. We offer a lot of different, we like to say, paths to the porch, because there's so many ways that you can begin to invest and empower and give your staff the capabilities to change, right? You're investing in them in some way through the things that they do with you, Clark. You're investing in them to be better recruiters, to be better sales managers, to be, whatever it is their role is within the organization, you're investing in them. Invest in their success as well. And that's really what this change readiness is meant to do, is to ensure that that well-spent money that you're putting into those sales recruiter tactics, these AI automation processes, and this technology that you're trying to adopt, that it's worth the money spent, that
Yeah.
you're getting your money's worth. And you're not just buying a new system to just upgrade your tech, but to really optimize and transform what you do as an organization. And I
Yeah.
do want to add one other final thought here, that while we talk about change readiness, it's the piece leading up to the time when you're going to begin executing something else, that the ultimate end result that you get, kind of the cherry on the top, is that through all of this, you now have a team, an organization, and leaders who are future focused, innovation minded. Basically, they are always change ready. They have the mindset and the tools and the practices to continually find ways to innovate and adapt and grow. So it's not these big events that need to happen. You are literally creating a culture of change, a culture of innovation, where it's just what happens. It's like, I think you're a Tony Robbins fan. Tony Robbins likes to say canny, continuous and never ending improvement. And that's really what we like to embed. When we walk away, you have an organization who is primed and ready for what's next at any time. So that way you can effectively pivot and adapt with ease.
That's it. It's the same thing I tell people when once you've learned about automation and content marketing, why would you ever turn it off? Once you know what you're doing
Hmm.
and what it can do, there's different ways to implement tactically and strategic, like the messaging and everything. But why would you ever shut it off?
Yeah.
It's a perpetual asset. And what you're talking about, there's no on and off switch. You just have it. It's learned and it's internalized. And I think that's why we both believe in the power of coaching versus just immediately going to say outsourcing something. You can't even outsource what you're bringing to the table at all. That's got to come from
Hmm.
within. It's why you can, right? If you can upskill yourself, your team, or your company, yeah, the domino effects of where that spread, where that reach can have an impact can be, it can be a bigger ROI usually than you and I could ever promise or even
Yeah.
predict. And I'm sure we've both seen that. We're like, there's no way I could have called that happening. Like I knew it was going to help that person, but then seeing what they could turn that into beyond even what I imagined, like that's where but you're allowing the seeds for that to happen.
Yeah.
Um, and you know what?
Yeah, I would
It's
just
also
say
what people
it.
want. Yeah.
Yeah, And just think about it this way. You're upgrading your technology, upgrade your people along with it. Like that's the way I would think about it in its simplistic form.
Well said.
Upgrade the teams, the way they operate, the way they lead, the way they approach and embrace change. Upgrade them along with the technology.
And
So that way they're both working at their optimal levels together.
I think it's really well said. And nowadays, when all the hype is around AI and everything else, people are gonna appreciate and recognize when you are actually still investing in people and don't lose that piece of it. And everything that's coming out with Gen Z and even someone like later millennials, like that's what they're craving. Like they're craving investment in them.
Mm-hmm.
And because they grew up on the phones and everything else, so they're lacking a little bit of that. Like that's a real opportunity there to stand out. So um, yeah, great stuff as always. This was we did pretty
Thank
good
you.
wrapping up and just kind of diving into this. So
I love it.
where can we're gonna have all the links in the episode summary and everything like that. Where should people find you? How should they reach out to you? What makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, they can reach out to me directly on LinkedIn. You can also email me at amy@onthepaintedporch.com, and you can check us out. You can check out our website, start there. If you have questions, or if you're change curious, as I like to say, just reach out to me. Or you're not quite sure where you're at in your readiness journey, you can go to paintedporchstrategies.com and you can book a call and we'll chat.
From there. Well, wonderful. Well, Amy, I'm glad that we wrapped this up in style. It
We
was
did it.
great.
We did
We
it
made it
with no tech
happen.
issues, Clark.
No, we did it. Hey, we're coaches, not technology consultants.
Exactly.
So no, this was great. Thanks for coming on and sharing all your wisdom and insight. And it was great. Couple conversations that we had. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, until next time, that is that. Thanks, y'all.